interesting about that word compassion is many of us miss the opportunity to be compassionate because I'll pick mine up because it's sitting right here because we're too caught up in a device. I read a statistic. It's probably been 18 months since I read this statistic. The average person looks their children in the eyes, their children under the age of 18 who are still living at home. The average person looks their children in the eyes for 30 seconds a day. So I started to digest. If that's the case for me, what am I doing? What's getting in the way of me having a meaningful interaction? And then what I realized, I do it everywhere I go. I'm scrolling Instagram, checking LinkedIn, I'm following up on an email. Meanwhile, I've just ordered a cup of coffee, bypassed 30 people. Someone must have held the door for me because I don't remember opening the door. And if everyone is hurting, I've missed a window to be vulnerable with them, either because I need to share or they need to share. Meanwhile, they asked how my day was going. I said it was fine. How was yours? And I have no idea how they've answered.
Welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the learning. Join the movement of deeply curious learners by hitting the subscribe button right now. Look, even the most successful and confident among us have been there. We've had those moments where we've questioned whether we're truly enough, whether it's in our career and there's been some kind of challenge or if it's a life decision. We've all had that inner voice of self-doubt, and it can be relentless. But what if the real question isn't whether you are actually enough, but rather what happens when you realize that you are enough? In this two-part series, we're diving deep into self-worth and overcoming that nagging doubt that we all find will hold us back at some point in time. For the next two episodes, our guest is Eric Brooker. He's a business leader, author, and host of the acclaimed podcast, Cancel Culture. Eric's latest book is You Are Enough, Overcoming Lifelong Doubts of Worthlessness. It's a reality-shifting experience for anyone who's seeking to reclaim their confidence and find that inner healing that we need to believe in ourselves. Eric is a master of building business relationship capital and fostering positive workplace cultures, and his impact goes beyond the boardroom because he has a podcast that was named in the top 1% globally, featuring guests like the founder of Reebok, the CEO of Chipotle, and minions like me. Eric has established himself as the trusted voice in leadership and culture. This episode isn't just about success, it's about shifting how you see yourself in the world. Get ready to embark on a transformative journey with Eric Brooker as we explore what it truly means to know that you are enough. The Dov Baron Show, it's not just another podcast, it's your passport to unparalleled insights. Each episode is filled with the wisdom of global leaders, scientists, entertainers, philosophers, theologians, presidential candidates, journalists, and so many more intriguing minds. Our special guest insights will captivate and inspire you. So hit that subscribe button and become part of the global community today. When it comes to building relationship capital in the workplace, look no further than Eric Brooker, our guest for today. So please turn up the volume and help me welcome host of Cancel Culture, author of You Are Enough, Eric Brooker.
Dov, it is a long time coming, and it's good to see you again.
It is a long time coming. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate you being here. I know you're a busy lad, and you've always got lots going on with your podcast and speaking and many, many other things, not to mention a tribe of children. We'll get to that later. This guy doesn't have a family, he has a tribe. We'll get to it in a moment. But I always like to start with this, and that is that we tend to think of people as we meet them in the moment and we go, oh, this is just who you are, without realizing that people grow into who they become. What is the emotional source code? What's the context of who you are that will help our listeners, our viewers understand, oh, this is who Eric is?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think a lot of it starts back to my childhood. Probably like a lot of your past guests, I had some of the most supportive parents. I'll give you an example. I was not on the football team. I was the mascot for the football team. We were the Mustangs. So yes, I was a horse on the sidelines. And my parents would show up to the football game to support me, the mascot. My parents went to my band concerts. They went to absolutely everything, which gave me that sort of innate feeling on the inside. I can do whatever I want, and I'm going to get the support. But interestingly enough, I struggled as an adult up until just a few years ago, wondering if I was enough even for my parents, despite all of the support. And it boils down to one incident that I write in my book, and I wonder if my parents even remember. It's funny. My dad will be here in a couple of weeks. I'll have to ask. But I remember wanting to take a test for what's called the extended learning program. All the smart kids, all of my friends were in this ELP class in 6th grade. Here I am, I turned 45 in 2 weeks, and I'm remembering vividly that 6th grade conversation with my parents where I said, why won't you let me take that test? And one of my parents, there were 4, so they will go nameless, said, we're not going to let you. And I got louder, why won't you let me take this test? And one of them turned at me and said, because you're going to fail. And it wasn't until I really started writing the book that I realized that was my motivation in so much of what I did in life and so much of what I do as a guy in his mid-40s. I want to prove, despite all the support I always got from my parents, I wanted to prove that I can do whatever I want. And that worst case scenario, I'm going to fail and I'm going to learn from it.
It's really interesting. Such a juxtaposition that you start off by talking about how massively supportive your family as your parents were. And then this nagging doubt that you're going to fail. I'm really interested, and we'll get into it because of the book you've written, but I'm really interested in how you hold those two very separate realities. One is, I'm very supported by my family, and the other is, I'm a loser, and they know it. So for me, and this is me, not you, for me that would be, are they supporting me because they know I'm a loser and they don't want me to feel like a loser? Like, it would cause an internal turmoil for me.
It's interesting because so many of our individual childhood memories, and there's a lot of science behind this, are either made up or remembered differently. Meaning, when my dad's here, he might say, hey, I remember the story very differently. What it boiled down to is I started to write the book and I came to this part of my childhood. I had to work through it. And really the realization that I had is they were supportive because I was doing what I was passionate about, whether it be playing the saxophone in 5th grade, being the mascot on the sidelines in high school. As goofy as some of it was, they wanted to see me happy and successful. When it came down to that 6th grade ELP test, what I realized as a guy in his 40s writing a book, they were right. Regardless of how the story plays out, they were right. I was going to fail. And I was at a spot in my journey into where I am and who I am today. I wasn't going to handle that well. I was going to have a breakdown, whatever a breakdown looks like for a 6th grader. I wasn't going to learn from that failure. I was going to embrace that failure as a failure. And ultimately what I realize is I've been trying to prove my parents wrong for that one thing on that one day in that one conversation for almost 40 years, when what they were trying to do was protect me. They were genuinely looking out for what they felt like was in the best interest. And at the time, again, in hindsight, I look back and think they did the right thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, as you know, my background is in psychology, and much of what we remember, as you said, is misremembered or remembered differently from others. I always say to my friends, you may have a problem with your way your sibling is with your parents versus how you are, but remember, they didn't have your childhood.
You know, the other thing that's interesting is you said, I've got a tribe. I've got a bunch of kids. I now look at that 6th grade moment through the eyes of a parent. And to your point, all of my children are innately different from one another. Very similar characteristics in many ways, very different in others. But they all need to be treated different. And I was treated different from my brother and my other brother and my sister who passed those tests. But I was treated different because I was different. And that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and in many ways, it's not okay. It's better than okay. in many ways, it's like I, the parent, cannot explain to you for you to comprehend that I'm seeing something you can't see yet. I can remember being in my teens and being a rebellious shit and going completely against the advice purely and simply because it was given to me. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't mine and I was a rebellious shit. I know for sure, because I tell people this, if my mom's friend had have said it, then I would have gone with it. But because my mom said it, it was like, no, I'm definitely against that. And I think that there's something about, and I hate to say this, but there's something about being on the planet, because it sounds ageist, but there's something about being on the planet longer that allows you to see things that you couldn't see when you were younger. I don't think that makes younger people dafter than older people. I just think there's an experiential thing that's different. It's fascinating. So how did you come to write this book? Why did you write this book? Was it that moment? Because if it is, this is a long time after for you to write the book.
So let's get into the kids for just a minute. We have 7 kids. Our kids range in age from 24, happy birthday to our oldest, all the way down to our little guy who just turned 5 a few months ago.
As I said, I've tried.
And I will trim the book down to like 3 paragraphs here. We have an estranged relationship with our 24-year-old daughter. We've not spoken in 7 years. We are the grandparents to a roughly 18-month-old granddaughter that we don't know. And it has changed the way I do everything. It's changed the way that I parent. It's changed the way that I come to friendships. It changes the way I sit at a coffee shop and interact with the barista. It has changed my life to be estranged from one of my children. It is gut-wrenching, and I would wish it upon nobody. I needed healing from that. I have no control. She is a grown woman, and she can make decisions. Whether we were in relationship or not, she's 24, she can make her own decisions. And I started to write about that. And as I started to write about that, I came to other people I've met during my podcasting days, some of the people that you've mentioned. And I realized that in my conversations, they're really well known for other things, flying F-16 fighter jets, from starting multi-billion-dollar companies, but they have a story of a miscarriage, a suicide, an estrangement. And I realized, man, I wasn't alone. And then we started talking about alcohol addiction with other people. And it's fascinating what it all boiled down to, what my sentiment boiled down to when I was in the 6th grade and with my 24-year-old daughter is, what's wrong with me? I am not enough. And that sentiment seemed to permeate so many of these conversations around different things. And the worst part of all of it is that we all feel like we are alone. Nobody's ever struggled with whatever it is that we're struggling. 4 years I went by. We're 7 years in. 4 years in, I would have not told this story. I would have told you that she goes to college in upstate New York at Skidmore College, because we knew where she lived and Skidmore was right next door. So that was the story, and you'd stop asking questions. And one day I just broke and I said, you know what? I don't know. If it weren't for that person having an estranged relationship with a family member, I don't know that I'd have written the book or even continued to share. But so many people that I share my story with have their own. Again, it might be addiction, it might be miscarriage, it might be suicide, but they're sitting on something that so many of us don't talk about with anybody.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate your vulnerability in that. One of the things that I teach my clients is you will never meet anybody who is not in pain. Everybody you meet is in pain. They may not look like they're in pain. They may have the yacht. They may own an island. They may have more money than you would ever dream of. They may have a lifestyle that looks marvelous and joyous and whatever it is. But everybody you meet has some level of pain. And that pain is trying to be eased. And how they're trying to ease it, you might look down your nose at and say, oh, I would never be a drug addict or an alcoholic or a whatever it is. But the truth of the matter is we're all trying to feel just a little bit better. And when you come at it from that place, you're not coming at it from a place of looking at them as in pain. You're coming at it from a place of what you just said, which I think is so beautiful, is you're a reflection of my pain and I am a reflection of yours. as my words are, you don't live in the world, you live in the mirror. Everything's reflective of you. And so that moment gives us this compassion to say, I'm walking down the street and I'm seeing the homeless person and I'm passed by the Rolls Royce, and those two people are equally in pain, but with different outcomes. And we can say one's better or one's worse, but the truth of the matter is, compassion is the commonality that we need.
You know what's so interesting about that word compassion is many of us miss the opportunity to be compassionate because, I'll pick mine up because it's sitting right here, because we're too caught up in a device. I read a statistic, it's probably been 18 months since I read this statistic. The average person looks their children in the eyes, their children under the age of 18 who are still living at home. The average person looks their children in the eyes for 30 seconds a day. So I started to digest. If that's the case for me, what am I doing? What's getting in the way of me having a meaningful interaction? And then what I realized, I do it everywhere I go. I'm scrolling Instagram, checking LinkedIn, I'm following up on an email. Meanwhile, I've just ordered a cup of coffee, bypassed 30 people. Someone must have held the door for me because I don't remember opening the door. And if everyone is hurting, I've missed a window to be vulnerable with them, either because I need to share or they need to share. Meanwhile, they asked how my day was going. I said it was fine. How was yours? And I have no idea how they've answered. And then I started to realize I do this at Starbucks, and I do it at Target, and I do it at any other retailer I go to. Meanwhile, my kids are generally with me, and I've missed an opportunity to interact with them, and we're all equal. That guy with the Rolls Royce is as equal as the homeless person, and I'm not paying attention to either one of them because, man, I wonder what Alex Hormozy did on Instagram today. Who cares? And we all do it.
Yes. And again, we're living in a comparative culture. That's part of the thing with social media that people don't realize is your brain is trained for comparison. Alex Hormozy got this many views on his last video and I didn't. So what is he doing that I'm not doing? Comparison. Or this person is 45 years old and I'm 45 years old and they look much older than I do or much younger than I do. And it's a visual comparison. Or this person only has 3 children and they have that car. Just nonsense. Instead of going, this is my life, and how am I doing with it at this, as you put it, relational capital level? I found myself yesterday, and I rarely do it when my grandkids are here, but I found myself on my phone, checking my phone. Now, I always have my phone with me because I'm a lunatic for filming the kids, right? I just love to film them, and I'm very happy that I do. But I also realized that I checked something on social while I was like,
yeah,
what are you doing? That's a no-no. I tell myself it's also a no-no with my wife, but it's not. I tell myself it's a no-no with my friends, but it's not. With my grandkids, I say it's a no-no, and mostly it is. So that's to do with us. That's the self-discipline of the relationship with the person who is in my proximity is more important than the relationship that I have with the person I don't even fucking know.
But it's interesting because I had a buddy of mine, Joe, called me maybe about 6 months ago, and he called me and he was in a bit of a funk. I said, Joe, what's going on? He says, I'm never going to get to do what you just did. I said, what are you talking about? He said, Eric, for 3 weeks, you and your oldest son posted images all over social media about your trip to Europe. We did Italy, we did Paris. Man, we had an amazing time. And I said, what do you mean you're never going to be able to do it? He goes, Eric, I don't make that kind of money. I'm never going to be able to take that trip. I said, time out. I said, social media is a highlight reel. Let's talk about this for just a minute. I just lost 2 of my largest clients weeks before I took this Italian vacation. 2 of my largest clients. Mind you, I then called my business partner and said, hey, I think I'm going to hang back and prospect for the next couple of weeks and not go because I have an obligation to my family. I have an obligation to you. Dare I say, fortunately for me, he has more experience than me. He unfortunately lost his oldest child about a year ago. And he said, Eric, you have to do this. First of all, it's paid for. The business work is going to come. We're going to be fine. But then I said, Joe, I didn't talk about the debt that I racked up. Damn near everything went on my credit card because I've lost 2 of my biggest clients and cash is king for the next few months. I didn't talk about the fact that one of us, either my son or I, might have disappeared on purpose for a few hours to avoid the other person in a foreign country. We lost each other. We didn't talk about that because social media is a highlight reel. Few people share the debt that comes along with the Disney trip or the European vacation. Few share the argument they've gotten in with their spouse. They share their anniversary because that's the thing to celebrate. We compare ourselves to the highlights of other people while others are also suffering.
That is beautifully stated. I've heard people talk about this a million times. I've spoken about it myself, but I think you put it probably better than anybody. Not just that it's a highlight reel, that's kind of a phrase, but you explained beautifully what it is that, yeah, you can go on the trip, you can buy the beautiful car. I had a friend of mine years ago, Bob, and Bob moved from Vancouver to Arizona, and he was living in this place in Arizona. It was very high end. And he talked about how it was full of $10,000 millionaires. And I said, what's a $10,000 millionaire? And he goes, they've got about 10 grand and everything is on lease. They lease their car, they lease their house. He goes, they even lease their furniture. I'm like, what? He goes, even some of their clothes are leased. He goes, because it's all about the look, all about the impression. And this was before social media. All about the impression rather than the experience of being real. And so what's better? I love buying shit for my grandkids, but there's nothing better than me taking my second youngest over to the little allotment of garden area that people grow their own veggies and stuff. And her and I go in there and she picks chives and strawberries and we hang out and then it's free. And it's this great experience of her looking at the bees and the flowers and she's not even 4 yet. It's just like, that's pure joy. I give her a toy, she's over the moon for about 4 minutes, and then she's onto something else. And I think that that's part of the way we've all been conditioned. So this work you're doing is profound work, Eric, and it's important work. And you're bringing it to leaders. So talk to me about that, because in this comparative world, there's also the other side, which is I don't want you to compare me to someone else. I'm all that in a bag of chips, and I'm going to hold this facade. So talk to us about bringing it to leadership.
That's an interesting question, because when the book came out, I had a couple friendly former podcast guests ask me, well, how are you going to implement this very vulnerable book that you've written into a corporate keynote? And I thought, oh, that's never really crossed my mind. I have no idea. No one's going to hire me to keynote on my book. And what I realized is everybody, as you know, everybody wants you to bring your book, talk about your book, and that's the business card for keynote speakers. So I got hired to give a talk, and I was really excited because of who the client was, having worked with the client, and I knew the space really well. Eric, bring your book. We want you to talk all about the book. And I thought, okay, I got this. And I had no idea what I was going to talk about. And then it really morphed into all of this is built on the backs of relationship capital. The reality of it is most employers, managers listening to this conversation or watching this conversation, they're so focused on KPIs and metrics and all the things that ultimately help them do their job and be successful. And that's important. I don't want to be dismissive of all of that. But while Eric's doing the TPS report, his wife has had a miscarriage, or they just bought their first house, or someone in their family just got diagnosed, or they just found out they were pregnant, or they just had a baby. Meanwhile, most employees choose not to share with their leader any of that information because most of us don't ask the question. We have our weekly one-on-one. I ask you, Dov, how the KPIs are, how Salesforce is it updated? What are you going to close this month? What are you going to close next month? What happened to this one deal? And then we go about our way. But when you put all of that aside once a month and we just have a one-on-one, let's do it like we're doing this via Zoom, because some people are going to say, well, I can't take him out to lunch, or I can't take her out to lunch because we work in different. Buy them a $50 Uber Eats gift card once a month and say, hey, we're not going to meet for our weekly metrics meeting. I just want to check in. I just want to see how things are going. How's the family? And then what you start to learn is I start sharing things. And some people are going to say, I'm not going to share my estranged relationship with my employer or my employee. But as you start to share a little bit, that opens the door up for relationship capital, that you may choose to share you're an alcoholic. You may choose to share that you have an estranged relationship. But as you start to share some of these details, you realize you are more like the person on the other end of that screen or the other end of that lunch table than you realized. And then you start, listen, October 27th is a really horrible day in our home. That's the day 4 years ago that my sister-in-law passed away at 31 with 3 kids due to an alcohol addiction. If you knew that and I worked for you, you have an obligation a week before to say, hey, I know next Friday is a tough day. Why don't you go spend that with your wife? Just go enjoy the day with your wife. Go make the most of it. Or, hey, I know Monday is your daughter's birthday. Why don't you take her out to breakfast, put it on the company dollar and come in a little bit late? Or, hey, here's a $50 Target gift card. I know you're moving into that house. There's probably plenty of things that you need. Just acknowledging it builds relationship. And there's a fascinating Gallup poll that says that your employees will work harder, they will stay longer, they will work for you. All of the things that you want out of your best employees, they will do, whether they are your best or not, because you have established relationship capital. And the bonus is that when it comes time to having a difficult conversation, you then have the credits in the bank to where you can make the withdrawal and have it received well. Dov, tough conversation, man. The last 3 months you haven't hit your number. What's going on? I know you've got a lot going on at home with your grandson. What can I do to help? All of the sudden, we're not best of friends, but we've got relationship capital. You've worked harder. Chances are we don't even get to that point. But if I need to have a tough conversation, I now, as the leader, have the credits in the bank to pull from, so you don't just clean up your resume and go find a new job or stop working altogether.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have a program called Creating Cultures of Belonging. It's a course, and I'm writing a book on it right now. And one of the things in that is that trust is built on reciprocal vulnerability. Once you share something, you open the door for the other person to share something. And again, as you just said, Eric, beautifully, it's not about becoming my best friend or vice versa, although that's possible, but it is about recognizing our humanness. We look at the other person, particularly if it's an employer or a boss, and we go, oh, they got all their poo in a pile and I don't. Well, maybe not. And that reciprocal vulnerability, and I tell leaders all the time, reciprocal vulnerability has to start with the leader, because there's no way as the employee, I'm trusting you with my shit unless I know you're going to reveal something. So you got to go first.
So 6 hours ago, I'm looking at my phone right now. 6 hours ago, I posted something on LinkedIn. Authenticity breeds trust. Trust fosters loyalty. Funny that we're having this conversation. But to your point, the leader needs to start, but the leader doesn't need to start with the miscarriage or the divorce or the alcohol addiction. It's the little stuff. Hey, I'm going to cut out early on Friday for my daughter's soccer game. Listen, my daughter didn't make the volleyball team. I got to cut out a little early today because she got a second shot at tryouts because she said, hey, I don't feel like I got a fair shake. I'm going to cut out early, drive to the other end of town. That opens the door for, wait, hold on a minute. Your daughter plays volleyball? My kids played volleyball. In fact, I played volleyball in college. And then all of the sudden, you've got a relationship that's just, and then Monday, it's, hey, how'd your daughter do in volleyball tryouts? Did she make the team? And it goes even before that. When I realized that Dov really likes a dark roast coffee, I don't need to bring him a cup of coffee every day. But once a month when I'm at Starbucks, I can put the note in my phone. I can set an alarm on my phone to buy Dov a cup of dark roast coffee every third Friday when I'm coming into the office. That little $6 investment starts to build relationship capital. And what Dov starts to say is, he really pays attention. How does he do that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's absolutely fabulous. Loving this conversation, Eric. Thank you so much. We're already at the end of part 1 of the show. We're going to come back for part 2 in just a click, but I want to make sure that people can find out more about you, where they can find out about your podcast, where they can find out about your book, and all of the resources that you have.
Yeah, there's probably 2 places you'll find me. I'm actively on social media, most active on LinkedIn. Connect with me. Don't hit the follow button. Hit the connect button. I would love to connect with you. And then the website, ericbrooker.com, which I'm sure is probably also in the show notes.
We'll make sure, actually, that all the social media links are posted in the show notes. And in case you missed it, don't worry. We're going to put that in there. We'll put down the URL and everything else that you need. Eric, it's been fantastic. We're going to come back for part 2 in just a click. Till then, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the relationship capital. Building it, or are you depleting your account? I'm going to be back in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.